Uh-oh. Want me to give roll call? No, but I can do that much.
(11) present, 1 absent.
Okay, I will start the meeting real quick. I'd like to call the Butte-Silver Borough Council of Commissioners regular meeting for Wednesday, July 20th, 2022 to order. And then we just did roll call. We have 11 present, 1 absent. Please note that Commissioner Frederickson is excused from tonight. Commissioner Sorge, could you lead us in the prayer and the pledge?
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Fellow Commissioners, Almighty God, we implore you, look upon us and guide us this night as we make decisions which will greatly affect our community of Butte-Silver Borough. Direct our thoughts, words, and deeds so that we please you and best serve our fellow citizens. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we'll move to approval of the minutes. Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to approve the minutes of July 6, 2022 regular meeting.
We have a motion and a second. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yeas, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving on to items not addressed on the agenda, we do have one. We have suspension of the rules. Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I would like to add item 2022-378 in accordance with the provisions of Section 6 of Rule 6 of the Rules of Business of the Council of Commissioners of the City and County of Butte-Silver Borough, State of Montana. The Council hereby finds that an emergency condition exists, which requires that the Council rules be suspended to allow Communication 2022-378 to be added to the agenda of the July 20th, 22 regular meeting. The reason for this suspension is as follows. Communication number 2022-378 is a communication from Lisa Bracco, the chair of the Butte-Silver Borough Fair Board, requesting authorization for the chief executive to sign a revised performance contract with Joe D. Messina, an artist scheduled to perform at the Butte-Silver Borough County Fair on August 6, 2022. This communication was not submitted by the deadline for the July 20th meeting because the revisions to the contract were not provided until after the deadline. However, since this concert has already been scheduled for August 6, 2022, and tickets sold, Ms. Bracco is requesting this matter be added to the July 20th regular meeting council agenda in order to ensure it is fully executed prior to the concert. Based on the foregoing and to allow this matter to be acted upon, we hereby find an emergency exists which requires a suspension of the rules. And at this time, I make a motion to approve the suspension of the rules to consider placing Communication 22-378 on the agenda at tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place on tonight's agenda. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? Anybody would like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yeas, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving on now to the Chief Executive's report. There's lots of things happening in the community. As we saw, the chip seal was happening, and it's always a fun time in Butte when we're doing street repairs because we get to hear about how bad the streets are all year long, and then when we start repairing them, we hear about that it's an inconvenience for everybody and they don't want them they don't want to be inconvenienced. But so that was MDT that was working on that. Our crews are out. They did a great job over Folk Festival. The community is looking great. I'm very proud of what's going on. I do want to correct a couple things that have been kind of put in the paper recently about some misperceptions about Ramsey and Love's Truck Stop. I want to be clear that there's some things saying that TIFID money is being used for water connection out at the TIFID. That is not correct. TIFID money has not been used for that. Love's will have to pay for any water lines that are going to connect to the municipal water system. Now, there's been something in there saying, well, we're on water restrictions. We asked for people to be on water restrictions early, and that we shouldn't be allowing anybody to use municipal water. With that kind of narrative, we shouldn't be allowing any industry to come into Butte or any development to come into Butte, because people are going to use our municipal water if that's the case. So, you know, I understand people's passion about the issues that we're talking about, but we want to be clear that there's some things that are not true. Silver Lake water is being used out there from a fire hydrant that is being metered for dust suppression and dust suppression only. They will not be connecting to the Silver Lake water system out there. That fire hydrant was put in out at Ramsey to help them with emergency water off the Silver Lake system, and so that was a benefit to Ramsey as well. So, you know, whatever position people have, I understand the passion, but I want to be clear as to what the truth is in the matter of what's going on out at Ramsey and what is being used. So we'll let that play out tomorrow night in the zoning board meeting and see what the result of that is, but I did want to clear up some of the misperceptions. Lots of other things happening. Went back down to lunch in the park today. Beautiful day. We're fortunate. The weather's getting warm, but we've been fortunate that our weather hasn't been as warm as many around. So we ask everyone to continue to have a happy and safe summer. And I will close the Chief Executive's report for tonight as we have a pretty full agenda. So next we'll go to any public comment on any item on the agenda. If you'd like to come forward, speak on any item on the agenda, please step forward, state your name, your address, and what item you'll be speaking on tonight. We do limit public comment to 3 minutes if you do come up. Seeing none, we'll move on to section 1. Bid openings, public hearings, and/or presentations. We do have a presentation, communication number 2022-342, to Nick Gleason, Finance and Budget Director, requesting Council of Commissioners authorization for a presentation on July 20th, 2022, for a presentation on fiscal year 2023 budget. Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioners, thank you for allowing us to come before you to do this presentation. Here with me tonight is Assistant Finance and Budget Director Karen Hassler. I will be doing the presentation, but Karen and I will both field any questions from you. Karen has been an integral part in developing this budget as always, so we'll be here to answer any of your questions for you. So tonight is going to be a lot of the same information that we had already discussed prior at our first budget meeting a couple weeks ago when we discussed the Chief Executive's priorities and some of the major topics that were in the budget. So next slide. We're going to just again be looking at the budget appropriations, the major components of the budget. We do not have any amendments to present to you tonight. We had very, very few amendments, so we'll hold them off till next week. They mainly relate to year-end closings of grant projects. We do have the projected revenues and some miscellaneous other financial information to share, and then we'll talk about some other budget matters and discussion points on the budget, and then give you a process timeline. So as we pointed out, the fiscal year 2023 budget appropriations is approximately $173 million. Is that going forward for you? Oh, there we go. Is $173 million compared to the final budget last year of $142 million, with an increase of $31 million or 22%. As we discussed, a lot of that, most of all of that increase is related to capital projects that are fully grant funded. They're not any tax dollars or rate-based dollars coming, and we'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about that. So you can move forward. The city-county budget, these are the graphs. We haven't showed these to you yet, but this is the entire budget. This is all funds. You can look at fiscal year 22 compared to 23, and a lot of the elements of the budget are very similar to the past years. Generally, if you're looking at the fiscal year 22 budget, that's more of a scenario that we see, mainly with like public works being one of our major components of our budget, as well as public safety and general government. This year, you're going to see more significant increase in public works as a percentage of the budget, again, because all of these grant-funded projects, or a majority of the grant-funded projects, are within the Public Works Department. So that's why you see that increase from $39 million in 22 to $74 million moving into 23. And public safety had some increases as well, mainly related to staffing and salary, some inflationary costs such as food and those costs in the detention center, and then some equipment costs. The general government is usually one of the top numbers or percentage of the entire budget. That's the main service budgets, that's the administrative offices, elected official offices. Right now, it's down to 11%. It's generally 14 to 15% of the budget, but again, the capital projects are driving the overall percentages of the budget. And then our wild card is always our housing and community development function. We never know what projects we're going to have before us in our economic development districts, so that can swing this budget a lot too. I just want to reiterate to everyone that a budget increase, an overall dollar amount increase of like $30 million is not always bad. It's not bad in this case. It's actually phenomenal that we are able to do $30+ million in fully grant-funded projects. So, you know, I think sometimes when we get up here, we don't sell our budget enough, and we don't explain it thoroughly enough, and that's my job and some of the department heads' jobs to really sell what's happening out there. So this year we're going to work really hard on doing that. I'm trying to really explain that it's a good thing that our budget's increasing, even if it was a year that we, for example, didn't have all these federal grants coming in and our budget's increasing, potentially that's showing growth. So we don't necessarily, I don't want to be sending that message, and I don't want people to gather information that, or even take a perspective that just because the budget's increasing that something's wrong. So I can't iterate that enough this year in this budget. Can you move on to the next slide? This is just another view of those changes, again, showing you that within public safety, we did have the increase, again, related to salaries and benefits, capital, including the Type 3 engine, and then detention center costs. So remember, public safety includes fire and the law enforcement department, which are very large staffed departments in the local government. Public Works has the $33.2 million increase in capital, again, fully funded. It has the $7.9 million flat grant project on Roosevelt Drive, and over $24 million just in the ARPA funding projects that we have, and we're very fortunate to get. There is some increases in this budget. In Public Works, it relates to a lot with chemicals. You've opened those bids, you've seen Director Neary up before you opening bids and seeing those costs rise, you've seen asphalt rise, you've seen oils rise, and you've also seen the cost of fuel rise. So those are all within that budget. I've also highlighted housing, community, and economic development. That is a decrease of $9 million. That's because all those major projects are getting completed in the TIFID, and they're been very, very successful out there. Karen, our Director of Community Development, Burns, as well as the TIFID Administrator, Kristen Rose, have worked really hard to develop that district, and now we're seeing the benefit from that district. So we're seeing a decrease here mainly because of the EDA grant and the rail project that happened last fiscal year. The funds that are committed this year are for these projects, it's sunset. However, you still see a budget rolling forward, and that's because there was projects committed, whether it was grant funded, committed projects, or internally projects that were already committed under contract. Those will carry over into the next fiscal year till they're completed. And then there's also some revenue that's generated out there off of, for example, the condo units. So there's lease revenue, so there always will be some revenue going in there till those facilities are gone. So it won't be totally gone, but for the most part, you're going to see that decrease forever now. I will point out again later that those economic development districts are quite a great tool for the local government. When the URA District Number 1 sunset several years ago, it was over like $1.8 million that came back into the taxing jurisdictions just to the local government, not including the money that equally almost goes to the schools in the state of Montana. In this particular district with the TIF sunsetting, there'll be $2 million in tax revenue coming back to the local government. So definitely an economic development tool that we need to hopefully continue to use in our community. The miscellaneous area did increase by $1.7 million. That's kind of like our grant program related to the ARPA budget. And that is, the $1 million of that relates to the Highlands College ARPA grant, and then the close to $700,000 of our community grant project. So you can move forward there. So this is the city-county based on expenditure type. So before I showed you by function, such as general government, police, fire, those public safety, public works, this is by type. So personnel services, capital outlay, grants, debt service, you can read those areas there. The 22 again is more standard. That's more normal. You can just kind of barely see some of the differences and change, but generally our fiscal year 22 is kind of the standard percentage of what represents personnel percentage of the budget or capital outlay of the budget. Again, a shift in 23 because of what we just talked about with the grants and the capital outlay that we have. Generally, I would have to say that personnel usually is slightly higher than the capital outlay like you see in 22. But again, that shift is occurring because of the federal grant funding that we have in the next couple of years to be allocated out and spending mainly on water and sewer projects and some stormwater. You can go ahead. This is just another view for you so you can see the dollars a little bit easier than just looking at the grant piece. The notes are on the next slide, so if you want to go to the next slide. As we spoke earlier, overall the budget shows an increase of $2.6 million in salaries and benefits. For the most part, a 5% increase on salaries has been allocated within the budget, and we also are showing an increase related to the benefits associated with that 5% increase. In the O&M increase, it's $2.1 million. Most significantly, as discussed, $475,000 relates to the fuel cost increase that we've implemented in the budget. I did want to let you know that we did increase this number in the line item budget, but for some reason, if fuel costs are significantly reduced, that money's you're not going to see a bunch of budget transfers and people using those dollars. Up here, the chief executive's recommendation to the departments and to my department is to monitor those funds, so you're not going to see transfers coming out of those line items at the end of the year to try to spend the money if there is money available. There's also been money placed in the budget that relates to an increase in our property and liability insurance. There's the $300,000 increase in the non-capital fixed assets. That also relates to some of the ARPA funding, but it more significantly relates to phase 2 of the communication project, the public safety communication project. That's the laptops and the iPads and other equipment that needs to be implemented for law enforcement and the fire department related to that project. That phase 2 project was actually funded last fiscal year and carried over into this fiscal year. And there's also the chemical cost increase in the budget. And juvenile detention, before you a couple months ago, we had to come and ask for additional money placed in the budget for juvenile detention. So we've asked for that up front this year. That money does not get spent unless we're placing juveniles in secured detention. So again, it's just another projection based on last year's, some of the increase in caseload and whatnot. We projected additional funding in that area. And then there's detention costs increase. So alone, we've increased for food, $125,000. In debt service is decreased by $2.7 million. This is attributed to the debt being paid off in the Ramsey TIFID, and then also a significant reduction in the amount of our 2017 general obligation bonds, which decreased by $867,000. In the grants and donations, we've increased. I've just talked about that, related to the $1 million ARPA funding to Highlands College, and then the $662,000 related to the community ARPA grant program. And we talked a lot already about the increase in capital outlay. So the staffing increases this year is projected at 4.75 FTE positions. The notes on the funding sources are there for you. Animal control is a new position. It's a 0.5 FTE position that is tax supported. The deputy county attorney request is $75,000 of that position for the next 3 years is funded by a Veterans Court grant. So of the $108,000, $75,000 this year we'll seek grant funding for, and again for the next 2 years. The legal assistant is a request to increase by 0.5 FTE. Right now there is a position down there that just works part-time, and because of the addition of the deputy county attorney last year and a new county attorney this year, in order to be adding these attorneys, there also needs to be an increase in the staffing levels to support those attorneys. And I think that was fully discussed last year by the county attorney, as well as those that came and presented before you, the judges, and in the communications and the letters that you received last year by the judges. The government buildings electrician increased by 0.50 FTE, but that is a net zero, actually, for tax-supported funds. The government buildings director did remove some of his intern and summer help and extra help positions because he's prioritizing his needs. And his need right now is to have a full-time electrician. He spoke a lot about that last week in Finance and Budget. And I think everybody can share that discussion, or I don't know if the Director Sullivan is here tonight to give some additional thoughts on that, but I think Chief Executive Gallagher also has a lot of input on that. The counting specialist, we're adding a 0.25 FTE. We did talk a lot about that position and how that transitioned from being just another clerk 3 position spread out through across a whole bunch of other departments that's now being more focused into some other areas. Then we increased, we've added an electrical inspector that's fully funded by the issuance of permits and enforcement within the planning department. Then in the archives, we added we moved it from an archives specialist from a 0.5 to a 0.75, and the archives director has given up an intern position to move to this position that she already has to a 0.75. And then in the clerk 3 position, again, is similar to what we just talked about when we're splitting the one position. So you can see not a significant tax or user fee. There was a lot of shifting going on by the departments to try to help each other out. And then some limiting and some removal of summer help and interns to try to offset any cost increase. So you can go ahead. So moving on to the tax-supported funds. So when we talk about tax-supported funds here, I'm just talking about those funds exclusive of the economic development districts. We currently will have a $65.3 million budget, excluding any operating internal transfers that we do. That's compared to 52.8 in 2022, so an increase of 12.5 million or 24%. So you can, next slide. These graphs illustrate by expenditure type. They're very consistent what we see year to year. We always see within the tax-supported funds, the most significant part is personnel services. It's where we have police and fire, we have all the administrative offices, so you see a more significant increase there. The road department is also considered a tax-supported fund, as well as the civic center, so you see a lot of personnel and staffing and the FTEs that are associated with the whole local government in the tax-supported fund, so that's why it's more heavily weighted on personnel. This will look very different in the non-tax supported funds. Then we also have the operated maintenance expenses. Those have increased. We've talked about those increases, mainly all due to inflation and the costs that we're seeing inflationary, whether it's food at the detention center or fuel at the pump. Those costs are all really hitting us hard. Other line items that departments had came to us and requested, they were really understanding and we held tight on them. So if it was office supplies or something like that, we really held tight on those, knowing that we had some areas that we just couldn't. I mean, we have to have fuel in order to remove snow. And so those are the type of areas that we did address increases in. We looked with the chief executive and really nailed down those items that we did feel that had to have increases. I will also mention that there's a lot of one-time increases that were in last year's budget that get removed this year. So if you ever need more information on particulars and diving down into a particular budget or department, you're welcome to come visit Karen or myself. We have spreadsheets of the increases and decreases, but it would be pages of documentation I'd be given to you, and it'd probably be more valuable or useful to you if you came and visited with us if you have any particular questions related to those increases and decreases. Not all the tax support tax dollars are used, so property taxes does not cover all of these budgets. Only about 52 to 55% of the $65 million budget relates to property taxes. Most of the other funds that coming in are other sources of whether it's federal or state grant money that we're receiving, but it's not our local property tax dollars that are offsetting the revenues to meet the requirements of the budget. You could go to the next slide. Okay. So again, in the tax-supported funds, this just shows the salaries increasing by 1.2 million, operating expenditures increased by 1.4, debt service decreased by 875, grants and donations within the tax-supported funds remain the same level, and capital outlay, which is driving again this increase within the tax-supported budgets, was an increase of 10.8 million, with the $7.9 million flap grant for Roosevelt Drive being the large contributor. We also have $1 million of ARPA funding that is being used or allocated right now for the Civic Center parking lot. And then other items such as the $430,000 that has already been committed for the Type 3 fire engine. You can go ahead. So the non-tax supported funds, those consist of the funds of user fees mainly. The large funds, or major funds, what we call them, are water, metro sewer, landfill. Those are the funds that are the large non-tax supported funds, as well as for this presentation on expenditures, it includes the economic development districts. So we're in the FY23 budget, we're projecting $106 million compared to 89. Increase of 17.9 million or 20%. These slides here just show you the allocation of expenditures. You can see 22 to 23. They look very similar by expenditure type. This is very consistent. The dollars do increase by what we've already discussed. We've had the discussion of the capital outlay and the grants and the salaries, but very similar to the overall budget picture of what normally happens in these non-tax supported funds. You can go ahead. So moving on to revenue projections, I think everybody up here and everybody really tends to focus on the appropriations, but my office focuses on the revenue because we have to have the revenue and we have to have the cash in order to build the budget. So the major sources of revenue, as you can see from here, and this graph for tax revenue also includes the tax increment district, the URE district, the TED district, as well as some local option tax that we have coming in. So that's what's in property taxes. This graph looks very similar year after year. Property tax and taxes are always the major source of revenue. Then you usually have the intergovernmental and state grants and the federal grants. This year, again, like last year, are higher because of the ARPA funding that we've received. So last year, we received the ARPA funding in '22 that related to the allocation, or direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury. These projections going into '23 relate to the competitive grant ARPA funding that we're receiving from the state of Montana. So consistent year to year, this graph looks very, and the percentages related to the sources of revenues are very consistent. Nothing looks out of whack. Go ahead. So just some additional revenue information before we close. Just want to talk a little bit about gross proceeds, the sunset of the Ramsey TIFID, the increase for new construction, and the local option marijuana excise tax. So the taxable value on gross proceeds is anticipated to increase by $4.6 million. That's taxable value. That equates to about $2 million in taxable revenue. Showing you this graph here, and if you went back another 10 years, it kind of looks the same type of shape. So we don't ever base and never build into our budget those years like 2012 and 2013 and 2022 tax years, which is 23, that full amount. Because over time, the average for the base of gross proceeds is on the taxable value side is somewhere around 7 to 7.5 million taxable. So these years, when we have these increased values, like we're seeing because of the price of copper, I'm very fortunate to have the mine and the copper right now in our community for sure, we're able to do a lot of capital. So there's a lot of one-time type expenditures that need to get addressed and things that need to come that we probably let go sometimes to a detriment, but so these years are those years that we can really take advantage of these and get these projects completed. And that's why you've seen in the handout that we gave to you a couple weeks ago all the details of capital. That's why we're trying to address all those capital needs and those priorities in this fiscal year. Go on. The sunset of the Ramsey district, I've kind of already discussed that a little bit, talked to you about the importance of having these economic development districts, because once they sunset, not only, like particularly in the Ramsey district, there's significant growth in the jobs and all that turnover into our community, but there's also a tax revenue that comes back into our community. And I'm just showing you right here, this is just based on last year's values. We didn't have a lot of information yet from Department of Revenue, so I can't give you updated numbers, but based on last year's values, that increment value in the white that shows the 2 million is the calculated tax dollars that will come back just to the city and county. So also, I'm projecting an increase. This is kind of where I pull my magic wand out and kind of do the wild card thing. And I try to project based on some of the information that we received from the planning department on new construction permits, and then just kind of the construction around the community, what's came on as new businesses, what's maybe gone away, and we try to balance that out. Projecting in our new construction number to have about a 5% increase, which is about $1.4 million in additional tax revenue that comes into the county, into the local government, the city and the county. Again, just need to point out, like today, for example, I know that the SID administrator in my office and the county assessor were out around in the community. They do a lot of traveling. We pick up a lot of properties, and they came back into the office. They do kind of an audit, and they came back into the office, and we do know that several of the new construction, especially residential properties, have yet to be picked up by the Department of Revenue in our assessments. So even though planning and they've got their building permits and construction permits, they're not necessarily going to hit the tax rolls this year because of it depends upon their completion of their projects in January. So it's not completion as of like today when they're giving us certified values. It's completion of in January. So that's why this number is kind of like a target kind of right now based on the permits that we have, and then trying to gather some of that preliminary information from the Department of Revenue. We also are implementing, beginning October 6th, the local option marijuana excise tax. We're estimating, based on some of the preliminary numbers that we're seeing as of today, that we will receive about $300,000 in allocations in fiscal year '23 for those funds. So next is assessment and user fees. Assessments are like the lighting districts, the fire hydrant districts. The user fees are the water, the metro sewer, and the solid waste, the landfill collection and disposal charges. This budget does not include any increases within user fees. The county road maintenance district, we're still basing the county road maintenance district on a $5,000 value and charging $87.71 per parcel. The fees for hydrants and lighting do change slightly. They fluctuate up and down. We're just kind of a pass-through entity for the utilities when we allocate these fees. So they slightly go up and down, both different directions. It's based on linear footage. So if certain properties come into play in a district, sometimes that reduces the rates. If they're gone or whatnot, then we have to adjust those rates accordingly. So on the other budget matters that I kind of wanted to talk about was, we've been talking a lot tonight about ARPA grants, and over the last few weeks we've been talking significantly about the American Rescue Plan and how that's impacted our community. And last year I gave you the same handout and explained to you that we have this funding called Pot A, that the local government received over $15.7 million in funding. We are able to apply for minimum allocation Pot B funds, which is about $5.5 million. And then we have Pot C funds that were the funds that the DNRC, through the state of Montana legislative last session, appropriated money to be granted out in a competitive grant process. So when I'm talking about the different buckets of money, of ARPA money, we're using all these three sources here to fund those projects, the $27 million, including the Rocker Water and Sewer project. These different buckets are funding those projects. Again, not related to tax or user fees. So the increase in appropriations will not cause for an increase. That should not say will. It will not cause for any increase in property taxes. That's a big typo. Again, over 26.9 million of the 31 million relates to the increase relates to the ARPA and federal and state, other federal and state funded grants. So not only was these buckets of ARPA money used for the competitive grants, there's also been a lot of work by the Public Works Department, Jim Keenan, Andrew Milliken, Mark Neary, seeking other grant funded opportunities to use as match dollars, so we're not increasing rates to complete all those major projects. You can go ahead and skip on, there you go. I gave you this scenario here because we had a lot of discussion last week in Finance and Budget about, well, if we had to still do these projects, which we do, the Basin Creek Dam still has to be done, the Molten Dam still has to be done, the Molten Filter System still has to be done, and on down. These are all projects that had to be done by the local government. So have we done those, and over time, what would that have cost each ratepayer in those particular systems? And so based on that information that I believe Commissioner Fisher was asking for this presentation, I went back and looked at some of our more recent bond issues and came up with the debt service allocations on those recent bond issues and how much would that impact a ratepayer. Granted, I think I used a very low interest rate of 3%. There's no way I would tell you today, especially if we couldn't get it done tomorrow, that we would ever be in the market of 3%, no matter what our reserve funds look like. I mean, it's the way rates are moving, we would be more like 4 or 5, so these numbers are very conservative. Also used a 20-year bond, and I did not implement the 125% net revenue. So when you have a bond issue, before you even begin with a bond issue, you have to show that you have the ability in your current revenues to meet 125% debt service coverage ratio. So that's not built in here. So doing these projects on an annual basis for a residential user of the system it would cost over it'd be a $71.25 increase in the water system and $45.57 increase in the metro system, based on that scenario that I just created. So again, trying to just illustrate that just because the budget went up, it's really good it went up, because we're saving the ratepayers all these dollars every year for 20 years. Okay, you can show the next slide with the impact. I think there you go. So I did the same thing for GO bond, because those are a little bit different than the special revenue bonds that water and sewer. So a tax impact of the $7.9 million on the FLAP grant for a $300,000 home on an annual basis for 20 years would be over $26. For a $200,000 home, $17.55, and a $100,000 home, $8.78. So you can go on. So you can easily see that a budget increase is not always bad. You can see right by those numbers that were presented to you, that doesn't always mean, or should raise alarms or anything. We just need to get into the details and really explain what's happening. So the next item just is the budget schedule. We will be opening a public hearing August 3rd. Remember, that public hearing remains open until this commission is ready to set the final budget. Just tentatively in the budget schedule, we've requested that budget be approved in a week, August 10th. That's just the normal process that has happened over years. We do anticipate getting the certified values from the Department of Revenue by August 1st. So we have 30 days from August 1st or September 15th, whichever is the lesser of. So we would be going by September 1st. The budget does absolutely have to be adopted. So we'll move into any questions you might have for us.
Thank you, Director Gleason. I just want to say real quick how fortunate we are to have the Finance and Budget Department led by Director Gleason to put in front of us a budget that is easily readable, or as it would relate to me, dumb it down, so it's understandable for everybody as it goes along there. And a lot of credit to the hard work that has gone on over the year from all of our departments when we're looking at going after these grants. We were ready, we were competitive, and we were awarded these grants, which ultimately is a tax benefit to our residents here. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions from commissioners. I think you've answered everybody's, except for Commissioner Callahan.
Well, thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. I think this is a two-part question, partially for Danette, maybe partially for Mr. Gallagher. But Danette, a couple years ago, 2-3 maybe years ago, we went to, we eliminated our fuel tanks, fuel pump, went to a process where we buy it at the jobber. At the jobber, we pay a state, federal tax. Did we ever get refunded for those taxes, or do we eat those taxes? And the second part is, I attended meetings, and in the evenings, I see Chief Executive Gallagher and Mark Neary and some department heads are driving their own vehicles. Is this going to continue with the price of gas? Are we going to stay with this process, or what's our policy there going to be? Thank you.
Commissioner Callahan, I'll let Director Gleason talk about the tax on the fuels, and then I'll address the take-home vehicles.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Callahan, Commissioners. So related to the fuel tax, we're still able to use the red dye diesel. So when we go up to the pump, they're not paying the tax on the diesel tax. I think I said that right. Did I say the right diesel? I'm a ranch girl. I can't even remember. It was a tank marked at the ranch. But so yeah, they're able to use, so we don't get the tax on that. We did have proposals. I think we had 3 different proposals when we went out to bid on what entity we'd be using to be providing our fuel when we had the tanks removed. Those proposals did allow for a continued 10 cents increase, but they also had an increase up to last April, rebate, and then we also had an additional rebate up through April of last year. That's why we're seeing the significant jump now in our bills that are coming since March. So to your question about taxes, we're not paying those taxes at the pump. What we are paying is more of the rate at the pump. So we're not getting the advantage of if we have our own tanks, which Director Neary is really working on that. The bids were opened here last week. Very encouraging bids came before you. So we'll be moving forward with that. But what we don't pay for is the transportation costs. So we get a very good rate in bulk purchasing because of that transportation. So when you're at the pump and you have, you're in competition with in the convenience stores around town, the gas stations around town, they're paying a lot of transportation costs. With us, we get a discounted rate not only for the competition, because every time we bid out, so every time Jerry Carpenter will be bidding out every time he needs a load of fuel between the entities that would provide fuel to us. And then at that point in time, they get very competitive. And we also do not have those huge transportation costs that you see at the pump.
Just to follow up.
Okay. Follow up, Commissioner Callahan.
I understand the red dye, I mean, that's no tax at the pump or at the way we used to get it. But most of our vehicles are gas. And the tax pump at the pump between the state and the feds is about 50 cents. So we do pay that. When we had our own, we were exempt from that, right?
No.
Commissioner Callahan, Director Basin.
Yep. Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Callahan, no, we're only allowed to use red dye diesel to get the tax exemption part. We tried to work with the Department of Revenue last year, or Department of Transportation is actually who we called to try to work through that to see if we could submit for refunds on anything, and we were told no, that local governments are not allowed to submit for those refunds, and we weren't getting those in our prices, before they were building that into the cost, I'm sure, when we did not see any rebate checks back for taxes.
Thank you, Director Gleason. And now, to address your question about take-home vehicles and vehicles that are driven after hours, I have sent out to all department heads to request inventory of the take-home vehicles that are there. Now, there is some need for people to have take-home vehicles, people that are on call. There's a lot of directors and different departments that do a lot of after-hours stuff, and the chief executive's car that I use, I do attend a lot of events and things like that, but it should not be used for personal reasons, and so we're going to develop a policy of what exactly a take-home vehicle should be used for. I think that there's been, over the years, just an increased number of vehicles that have been taken home and stuff, and it really has come to light now as we're dealing with the fuel prices and things like that. So we're going to come up with a policy that relates to that, indicating what the take-home vehicles and why they should be used and when they can be used and how that will look. And we've done that with all of our departments. Okay, and so we'll be addressing that and working that policy.
Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner O'Neill.
Thanks, Mr. Chief Executive. On that note, does that fall on the police vehicles as well?
I've asked for, Commissioner O'Neill, we've asked for all departments to give us an inventory of what they're doing there. And there is a need, for certain people that are always on call. And so there is a need where some of those vehicles are in the possession of those people that are called out at certain times. So we will address that. I'm just getting the inventory of everybody that has a take-home vehicle and what the need is and how we're going to move forward with that policy. Follow up, Commissioner O'Neill.
Thanks, Mr. Chief Executive. On that too, it's just the take-home of the police, the dropping off of shifts. That's, again, I think it always gets explained to me, but it's still something that I can't make sense of, especially with fuel prices, mileage, wear and tear on the vehicles.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner O'Neill. I'll be working with Sheriff Lester, and we'll come up with a policy and how as we're moving forward with all departments. Any other questions of commissioners? Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive, and thank you, Danette, and your team. This is pretty amazing. Even I can figure it out. So the new local option marijuana excise tax that is being imposed, it doesn't begin until October 6th, and we're expecting to generate about $300,000 in funds. So it's just interesting because tonight, we have alcohol allocation people here to speak on their candidates as agencies that tax can be used for. But is this going to be put into the general fund, or is there some way we're going to disperse these funds when they start coming in? Thank you.
Commissioner Shaw and Director Basin.
Yep. Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Shaw, they're in a separate fund. In your budget book, it's 2115. We've kept it separate for a reason, so those funds can always be tracked. That doesn't mean that the funds can't be transferred from that fund to the general fund to support any activities if the Chief Executive or this council desires that. But right now, the only budget in that fund is for a behavioral health specialist, or coordinator, I'm sorry, that is in that fund. Originally, during the past year, serving on the ARPA committee, I think you recall probably that we had allocated funds for that position. And then it was also funded by our jail diversion grant, our county matching jail, or tribal jail diversion grant. That grant has changed. So that position can no longer be allocated to that budget. And so we've made the recommendation with the Chief Executive to this council that we fund that position for now underneath this marijuana excise tax money. That's where she'll be working, is in the behavioral health and the mental health arena. So we felt that was a good fit. In the meantime, we are also working with a lot of partner agencies that have agreed to contribute towards that position as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Gleason. I'd just like to add to that, as we talked about the marijuana tax and when we put it on the ballot for the citizens, it's my mission, and of course it's going to be the council that is going to appropriate the money, but to use this money to deal with mental health and addiction problems that we have due to drugs, alcohol, different things to address issues that we have in the community. But again, that will be a team effort that we have here, but that was the way we proposed it to our taxpayers. Any other questions of commissioners? Commissioner Reardon.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. Danette, my question to you, I guess, is we have some new things coming at us with this excise pot tax and all that, and I think everybody pretty much around this table is on the same page about recognizing that we do have a shortage of funds going toward what's going on, and also a shortage of help out there and all that. My question, I guess, is when you said that you can move this out of this and all that, is there any way that these funds can stay, say if we said we wanted to use the pot tax toward mental health and mental stability and all that, rather than transferring it to the general fund or something like that? Is there a way to earmark these accounts from say the pot tax to, let's look at one thing that we've discussed somewhat with Director Neary and the planning department is a fund basically for hookups on these new homes to supplement the cost of the metro sewer and the water. And I mean, it seems like everybody has some problems, but if you earmark, that money's always going to be there to supplement these programs no matter what.
Commissioner Reardon, Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher and Commissioner Reardon, it takes action of the Council of Commissioners by resolution to earmark funds if the statute doesn't require it. So when the marijuana excise tax came about and the legislature passed allowing this local option tax, they did not put restrictions on it for local governments. They're leaving it up to you to decide how those funds should be spent. So if that's why we placed it in a separate fund away from the general fund. It's in its own fund. It would take action in the budget to move money from that fund to the general fund or another fund within the local government. So right now it's in a separate fund, but if you wanted to earmark it for particular and always have it earmarked, unless council took another action to not earmark it, you would have to make that motion and then create a resolution to earmark those funds and reserve that cash for those particular programs.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Any other questions of commissioners? Commissioner Anderson, and then Commissioner Sorge.
Chief Executive, thank you. If I could add a follow-up to that question, with the no earmark, like you mentioned, and would have to do that, and the desire and the wish to put it in treatment programs, say, I would agree with that. Does that count for both the recreational use and the medical use? And is that two separate funds, or do they both go into the same fund? And is that approximation of the 300,000, does that include both funds, or is that one or the other? Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson, Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Anderson, to your question, yes, they're both the adult use is what they called it, and medical use. Funds, that is the $300,000. That's based on the reports that have been submitted thus far and on the Department of Revenue's website underneath the marijuana use in our community. So that's the revenue that's generated for both use on those for over the period of, I think there was 4 months reported that I could project the revenues based on. And they are all in the Fund 2115. And they're not separated out.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Commissioner Sorge.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Danette, my question to you is, we're kind of wondering, in last June, the Butte-Silver voters voted to increase the search and rescue mill levy. Is that part of the appropriations that's in the...
Commissioner Sorge, Director Gleason.
So Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Sorge, it's much like any other voted, like Mile High Soils, for example, is a separate district, just like Search and Rescue is a separate nonprofit from the local government. We call them custodial funds. They used to be called agency funds. In our accounting world, they like to change things, so now it's called a custodial fund. We are just the entity, because the way the voters passed, that we will put that on a tax bill, collect the money similar to what we do for the schools district, and pass it on to the search and rescue. So there's no funds in the budget. You won't see anything related to them. We have no control over those funds or anything. We're just a custodial entity for those funds. The only difference with those funds is that they're subject to our mill levy cap. So we have plenty of room in our cap. We've never been a community that's taxed to the cap like most all other large cities and counties in the state are pretty much capped. You can go online and look at the various budgets, and they're at their cap, their mill levy cap. That would be the only play that they come into, is on our calculation of that cap number.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Any other questions of commissioners? Seeing none, thank you, Danette, and Karen. You guys do such a fantastic job, and all the finance and budget department, all the hard work and effort you put into this. All right, moving on, we'll move on to Section 2, consent agenda. We have Section A, 1 through 4, and Section B, 1 through 21, with the addition of our, I better read that again here. Communication number, God, I should have brought glasses here. 2022-378 to tonight's consent agenda. Do we have any friendly amendments or segregations? Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. I would like to segregate out of the Committee of the Whole Meeting Report, Item 6, which is 2022-354.
So that's out of the Committee of the Whole, 2022-374?
354.
354, okay. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I'd like to segregate number 18, Communication 2022-374.
That's communication number 18, communication number 2022-374. Commissioner Sorge.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Out of the, I'd like to segregate out of the July 13th, 2022 meeting reports of the communication number 2022-296.
That's all the committee reports.
On page 7.
The Financial and Budget Committee report?
Okay. What's the number on that again?
2022-296.
Okay. 2022-296. Any others? Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. I'd like to segregate communication number 2022-377.
What number is that?
21.
21. So that's number 21. Communication number
377.
2022-277.
377? 377.
377. Thank you for the correction. It's my mistake for
See
not
if I
wearing
can get this
glasses. It's a little dark in here tonight. All right, any other segregations? Seeing none, Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to approve Section 2 consent agenda, item A, committee reports, with the exception of, in the committee of the whole meeting report, segregating item 6, 2022-354, and in the Finance and Budget Committee meeting report, there was no item, but it's 2022-296. Is that correct, Commissioner Sewerage? There's no item number?
Number 1.
And then in Communications B, 1 through 21, I'd like to have, there's a segregation exception of item 18, 2022-374, and item 21, 2022-377.
We have a motion and a second to approve tonight's consent agenda. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? They don't have your votes on it.
Uh-oh. There we go.
And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yea, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving on to item number 6, the committee reports. Find the spot where I'm at here.
Page 8.
It's communication number 2022-354, Eileen Joyce, Butte-Silver County Attorney, requesting Council of Commissioners to complete the state-approved SUD treatment and prevention form for the submission back to the DPHHS Addictive and Mental Health Disorders Division. Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. If you all recall, a couple weeks ago, we received this communication, and there were several candidates, several agencies that met the requirements by the state requirements to take part in these allocations of monies. And we decided to reach out to all 7 entities and agencies and ask them if they would come before us to make a presentation, just to give us a little update on what they do and what they feel they do meet the requirements by the state law, but just for our own edification, because we need to allocate the monies in some way. And we have 2 candidates or 2 agencies that are here this evening that are going to give us a presentation. First, we have Dan Parrish with it's the SMART program, and that would be, let's see, trying to remember the acronym here, but anyway, it's a SMART program. It's with CCCS, of course. And then the second person that's here to represent Youth Dynamics is Tim Harbeck. So we'll start with anybody have any question about it. We'll just begin the presentations, and we'll start with Dan Parrish. Dan,
Mr. Parrish, and
come to
Mr. Thatcher, if you'd like to come up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I struggled with technology. I got a D in high school and in college. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice, and I'm sure many of you will appreciate that. But for the record, Mr. Chief Executive, members of the Commission, for the record, my name is Mike Thatcher. I serve in the capacity of Chief Administrator for Community Counseling and Correctional Services Incorporated. We're a private not-for-profit corporation that's been headquartered in Butte since 1983. I like to tell people we were Butte-born and Butte-raised. We do operate a myriad of programs in a 3-state area, but primarily our business is facilitated here in southwest Montana. I want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to join you tonight. I realize it gets awful warm in here, and I elected not to do a PowerPoint for that purpose, because I know that even seems to elevate your temperature, and I'm trying to keep that down. Joining me is Dan Parrish. Dan will talk about the basic components of treatment for substance use disorders from the SMART program. Dan is the program administrator of SMART and has been with CCS for quite a few years. He's been the administrator for several years, and he's Butte native, and we're fortunate to have him, and he's a hell of a lot smarter than I am when it comes to treatment. Before I get started, I do want to tell you, I'm not here to broach you with good news. We're seeing an elevation in alcohol tax dollars for one primary reason. COVID hit, people have elected to heavily medicate. So revenues are up for substance abuse dollars, which isn't necessarily a good thing. That means people are staying at home, or they're purchasing a lot more alcohol, they're drinking heavy, and they're not reaching out to get treatment. We're seeing numbers decline relative to people wanting treatment. At least that's our experience. Maybe some of these other agencies are seeing something different. So it's kind of a mixed bag of goods. It's tragic in that there all of a sudden may be additional dollars to be expended, yet people are not accessing services. And there's a number of issues why. A number of providers elected not to do personalized intimate counseling during the COVID crisis. A lot of folks have elected to go with telehealth. I think most of you all know what that is. That's getting to talk to somebody across the computer. I'm pretty biased. I think it's less effective than having an intimate engagement with a counselor one-on-one or in a group setting. We very temporarily elected to do that, and then we proceeded implementing a number of protocols for COVID so that we could continue to allow people to access services. It's a big issue, at least in my opinion. Maybe other providers don't agree. But I just think it's imperative that Commissioner Shaw here knows we're all here to ask for earmarked alcohol tax dollars, and I certainly don't begrudge anybody that's coming up here looking for additional revenues. But I think I would be remiss. I got the great pleasure of getting to visit with you in December. We talked to you about substance abuse and mental health, both. But tonight I just want to reiterate a little bit about substance abuse and how our agency got involved, because I think it's important, at least from our perspective. In 2013, Butte-Silver elected to discontinue being a provider. They were a public provider for substance abuse services for our county, and frankly, for folks in southwest Montana, because there's a real shortfall of people having the ability to do that. But in fact, I just got to interject, we are now in Anaconda because they didn't have a provider, so we received their alcohol tax dollars. There's an adjacent county that just this week requested we open services down in their county, and they will offer their tax dollars. It's a small amount of money, but it speaks volumes for the services and who really steps up, the continuity of who delivers the services. So I caution you, whatever you do with these dollars, you need to at least look at the credibility of people and their track records and have they delivered on what they say they're going to deliver. That's not always been the case, unfortunately. When communities lose treatment providers, it's a domino effect. The jails populations increases, emergency room calls, all the collateral things that happen. So I just wanted to point that out. When I talk history, when I said we stepped up, us and Western Montana Mental Health both bid on it. We were selected. We took over in June of 13. So we've been the provider, and we've received earmarked tax dollars 100% since that time. I recognize the state is trying to say, well, we need to divvy this up a little bit more, but there's a couple historical points that people forget. In 2018, Governor Bullock called a special session, and they cut Medicaid provider rates, and they cut the amount of alcohol tax monies that was coming. So I'm going to give you a handout. You're going to see our historical fiscal impact of just the dollars we've received, and it's inclusive of Medicaid, which is the majority of our funding, and the alcohol tax dollars. So with your permission, Chief Executive, I can hand these out. And I made these very simple. I think I gave these out in December. I can't remember. I frankly can't remember what I had for lunch today, so bear with me. So I think what's important is you look at this. This is simple. This would be a real simplified income tax statement, an income statement, excuse me. Danette will be schooling me here in a minute. But if you look at the history, so at the very bottom, you look and you'll see 2013. We had 1 month, we showed a $642 loss. As you go through the years, you can see in 14, we showed a profit, and a profit for nonprofits, excess revenues after your expenses. And then all of a sudden, things got lean for several years, and some of that was the resultant reduction in Medicaid rates and the alcohol taxes. So we saw a decline, we felt the impact. You fast forward 18, we saw services increase, so we did okay. And then you jump into 19 to 20, same thing, we showed losses, operational losses. The last 2 years, we've showed a small profit, and one of those years was we were a successful applicant for a PPP loan for our entire nonprofit. Without that loan, we would have laid off about 60, 70 people. In short, what I'm trying to point out to you is here, when you look at the bottom line, we're starting our 10th year, July 1st, we took this on, and we've lost $209,000 doing it. And the other providers might not like my story, but what I'm trying to say, because they do great things, is we're not operating with the budget surplus here. We're barely getting by. The last 2 years, there's been an increase in alcohol dollars, again, because of, unfortunately and tragically, people increasing their substance use. I'm frankly in the fiscal end here at the risk of appearing to be arrogant and selfish and brazen and requesting that we continue to receive 100% of the funding, at least 1 more year. And my explanation would be is we're dealing with the same things as other agencies, inflation exacerbated by recruitment, retention, staff, same thing Butte-Silver and everybody's dealing, fuel costs, et cetera. There's some good things I think coming down the pike. So I'm asking for the continuance for at least 1 more year, and then I'm amenable, if you do agree to do that next year, sit down, and if there's pieces of the pie, this is a small pie, extremely small pie. So you get 7 people who want a piece of the pie, what potentially happens is you lose 3 or 4 pieces of the pie. Again, I'm trying to speak from experience. I've seen some providers come and go. I've seen some new providers come in. They passed the law in 2017. Everybody thought it was great, and I believe in competition. Justin Fortune should have 9 construction companies bidding when you bid for a job. He may not like that, but that's what made America great. The problem is they thought it would increase the number of addictions counselors, more people will give people more options to choose for counseling. Well, nobody really listened to when we said there's a shortfall of counselors now. We're all competing for the same counselors. And so it's created a problem. Every one of us in Southwest Montana are now forced to, MCD's paying $30 an hour. Well, you pay 20, I'm going to MCDC. So we're all in a bidding war for staff right now, which is the tragedy that happened. And the other thing, it gave anybody who is licensed the ability to get licensed through the state to provide the services and put up a shingle and say, I'm a great counselor. So there's always a downside to what appears to be an opportune time. And lastly, the Medicaid rates, when they got reduced, you used to get roughly $300, roughly. I might get misquoted by one of the providers for a CD eval. It's $99 now. So somebody said, well, that's pretty good. That one takes you 3 or 4 hours to do a good one. Your time staff members probably making that, so you lose money on a CD eval. So I guess in short, I just kind of give you a picture of this money, and I just scribbled this down, or I'd hand it out to you. So in 14, the total amount of earmarked tax dollars was $30,000. Don't go very far for 7 entities. And over the years, it went to 70, 70, 56, 59, 55. So the majority of the time, it's not been a big pot of money. And that's why I don't think anybody came after it, to be blunt. I'm just being blunt. It may be offensive, but blunt. The last 2 years, it's increased, and it certainly has helped us with the increase. We've hired an additional mental health person. We're in the process of putting 2 more peer mentors on. So we're taking anything we can generate and trying to increase services. Prevention's a big issue. I think all of us do not do a good job with it. We signed an MOU with the school districts to get into the schools and work with kids, and COVID hit. So we're trying to resurrect that, get back in. So from the business end of this thing, I probably talked longer than I thought I would. I think the historical perspective is important. We're asking you if our longevity and sustainability is critical. So at the risk of appearing to be an old, artful dodger, miser, and greedy trying to capture all the dollars, I am, because we need them. We need them to sustain our operation. I will publicly say, in the next year, the good news is, whether you're a proponent or opponent, those marijuana dollars, you're going to see an increase in services, whether they're mental health or substance abuse and all the above throughout our state. Additionally, in the legislature, we're sitting on $1 billion surplus. If you talk to anybody over there, it's called the sugar high. It's going to be gone. I've never seen $1 billion surplus in my 40 years of doing this. It's been a long time. So there's money going to be available. It's not now. We're dealing with a 1% increase in our entire agency July 1, 200,000. Our health insurance went up 253. Our raises for employees trying to hang on to them went up almost $500,000. We all share the same thing. So I'm up here apparently whining a little bit, but it's reality. We're losing some good people because we can't retain them. But the last thing I'll tell you is there was a study completed, and it's across the board. Really, it was by Health and Human Services, commissioned it, and they've come out basically and said the increases need to be at least 13%, roughly is the number I've heard. And that's like CNAs, addictions counselors, LPNs, nurse practitioners. That's how woefully and inadequately funded these dollars are right now. Lastly, I was in Helen all day today, and they're talking about, we're trying to open an inpatient treatment facility in Glendive and repurpose. They're talking about increasing Medicaid rates for an inpatient bed by about $30 a day. It's the lowest compensated bed in the treatment system for inpatient. Most places don't even want to deal with Medicaid because of the low pay. So in short, on the fiscal arena, I'm probably bold, but I'm just being very candid with you. We need your continued support. We need the state's continued support. I think we're close. And again, I think it speaks volume to the level. If I got Anaconda and Dare Lodge and some of these counties reaching out and asking us to come in and provide the service, we know we're probably going to do it initially at an operations loss. But it isn't about the dollar. The bottom line don't drive us. We're mission driven. We're a nonprofit. And I think we're good at what we do. And so we're going to go in them communities. They need our help as well. So I will conclude by letting a smarter guy get up and tell you a little bit about substance abuse. And, he's definitely got a lot of knowledge. And I'm grateful for the partnership for the 9 years and start number 10. And whatever your decision is, I will respect it. We'll continue to move forward. You've got tough decisions to make. Appreciate your past support. Hopefully we can continue to receive it. With that, I'll turn over down. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Thatcher. Mr. Parrish, welcome.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief Executive and Commissioners. That was pretty short for Mike, everybody knows. I'll just piggyback some of the stuff he said, and then I'd like to pass out some brochures of what things we offer. So the SMART program, like Mike said, we had an MOU in the schools, which allowed us to send a counselor down to the A school, East Middle School, and other schools when needed for 10 to 15 hours a week prior to COVID. We offer outpatient, intensive outpatient substance abuse treatment for juveniles and adults. We just hired a mental health counselor for 10 to 20 hours per week, which everybody knows, depending on need, should be increased. We also provide ACT class, which is for DUI offenders, MIP for alcohol, drugs, and then we just started a few months ago MIP for tobacco and vape, which is education and prevention based. The SMART program is the primary provider for all 3 treatment courts in Silver Bowl County, the adult family drug court, the DUI court program, and the veterans court program that's just started about a year ago. Like Mike said, we just opened an office in Anaconda 1 day a week, which is increasing need, so it might be moving up to 2 days a week. The SMART program has 6 counselors on staff, 1 peer support specialist, and 3 additional support staff right now, and a part-time mental health counselor. And so I'd like to pass out some brochures if that's all right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Do we have any questions of commissioners? Seeing, Commissioner Worden.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. I'd just like to thank Mike Thatcher for all the things. Everybody in this room is aware of what he's done for this community. And I think when the guy comes up and is perfectly honest with you to establish something that's going to grow and has been an ongoing service, we cannot do nothing but support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Worden. Commissioner Shaw, you wanted a point of clarification? Okay. Thanks for your time, Mr. Parrish. So we do have one more presentation. We will have Tim Norbeck from Youth Dynamics come up and present to us today. Welcome, Mr. Norbeck.
Thanks, Chief Executive Gallagher and Commissioners. A tough act to follow, a couple of my dear friends there, by the way. But I'm here to represent Youth Dynamics. I'm in day 6 of employment. Youth Dynamics is the largest provider of children's and mental health and behavioral programs in the state of Montana. It's a nonprofit. Started in 1981. It's 32 locations throughout the state, has 600 employees. My new position with it is Development Director on the western side of the state. I'm here to ask to be a part of those alcohol tax monies. For those of you that know me, I spent 35 years in education. The last 9 years as a school superintendent. And the last 2.5 years, probably the most difficult years of my life as an administrator. Seeing the struggles of young people with mental health and addictions because of where we were in our world. And so, you know, I understand it's a small pot. I'm encouraged by what I heard tonight, you know, with some of, you know, the taxation funds with the marijuana. You know, I'm overwhelmed by what's occurred at the state level. In the first quarter, $42.5 million were collected in marijuana taxes in the first 3 months. And that is going to the general fund right now. So hopefully in the next legislative session, people understand the importance of mental health and the parallel with substance abuse that occurs with it, because it is out there. Commissioner Mankins, he's responsible for youth risk survey every year. Can only imagine what those numbers look like next year on top of this year for public students across the state. And if you haven't followed it all, the funding for those sources in education have diminished. You know, the CSCT programs, you know, the Comprehensive School and Community Treatment Programs, you know, that funding was cut way back. Mr. Thatcher talked about Medicaid reimbursement and so forth. I mean, the largest provider in the state pulled out and right at the end of the school year. So, you know, it's important to understand what is there, and I'm a huge proponent and backer of mental health. In education, we didn't have ARPA funds, they're called ESSER funds, similar. You know, a good percentage of the ones that I was responsible for went towards mental health, because what I had seen develop over the last couple years. And so, you know, I ask in short to be a part of it. You know, there's parenting and education and support programs that are tied, you know, to substance abuse. There's licensed addiction counselors, there's outpatient, and, you know, a bunch of other entities that, you know, can be looked at. And, you know, I hope, it's a small pot, like I said, but there's other funding sources out there that I think are beneficial to young people. Because the bottom line is, if they are having those issues, whether it's tied to substance abuse or mental health, they're not going to learn. They're not going to learn at all. And, you know, to not complete, you know, education cycle with graduation is a huge thing. High percentage of those that Mr. Thatcher works with are young people that don't have
high school educations. There's a great direct parallel between that. So again, I'll keep it short. I've been here a long time tonight, but would like to be a part of that. I'd entertain any quick questions, or if that's allowed, or...
Thank you, Mr. Novak. Any questions of commissioners? Seeing none? Thank you both for being here tonight. Mr. Parrish, did you want to come have a point of clarification?
Sorry, Chief Executive. I'd just like to pass this out with another part of our services and some of their statistics. And if anybody has any questions following this meeting, you can get a hold of me. I left my card on those brochures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. And again, Mike and Tim and Dan, appreciate your coming tonight. What we'll be doing now, we have another slate of agencies that were asked to come next Wednesday to do the same thing, give presentations, and after that time, we will have to get together and we'll make our decision on the allocations. So thank you again for coming tonight.
Thank you. So moving on, we will move to, let's see, making sure, are we on communication number 1? I can't read. Wish we had some light.
I know. Turn the light
Yeah,
on.
can we turn some lights on? I can't see anything.
I'm glad you
Oh,
said it.
that's so much better. All right. So, moving on, so to communication number 2022-296, Commissioner,
Finance and Budget Committee report.
right, the Finance and Budget
Okay,
Committee
very
report.
Okay.
Right, yeah. Okay. Danick Leeson, Finance and Budget Director, notifying Council Commissioners that the fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget will be referred to for Finance and Budget Committee for the July 6, 2022 Finance and Budget Committee meeting, which will be scheduled to start at 5:30 p.m. in the chamber, in the council chambers. And so, who segregated this?
Sorry.
Commissioner Sorich, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive, fellow commissioners. I segregated this so we can talk about it in the future, and sort of we can still keep the budget at the top of the order. So I would make a recommendation that we move this to the committee of the whole for future communication, so it'll be on next week's agenda also.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to move this communication to the committee of the whole. Is there anything on the question? Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. Thank you, Commissioner Sorich. I know this isn't a proper time because we're going to be visiting about this in the long haul, but I think the sooner we bring up some of these things to be thought about over the next week or so, it will be better. And one of the things that I've come up with is the Civic Center parking lot lot reserve. There's $1 million in the budget for that, and I don't think it's a wise idea to spend $1 million right now when they're still cleaning up the pair of tailings. I would like to see that $1 million spent on government buildings renovation, such as the courthouse and other community buildings that the county owns that are in need of, desperate need of renovation. So I'd like everyone to consider that prior to next week's meeting, that we move that $1 million from the Civic Center parking lot to government buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. So we do have a motion and a second to move it to committee of the whole for next week. Could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yeas, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving back to, got me flipping here. Number 18, communication number 2022-374, Karen Burns, Community Development Director, requesting Council Commissioners authorization to have Chief Executive Gallagher sign an agreement with Schneider LTD to provide construction services to furnish all labor, materials, and equipment needed to restore the exterior Basin Creek Caretakers house. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. I have segregated this communication because a long past history of me and the Basin Creek House not having much in common. And as you know, prior to you being Director of Park and Rec and now Chief Executive, this has been an issue that's been kicked around for some time. I just don't see it wise putting $142,000 plus into a building out there where we've already spent over $150,000 keeping it in tacked to where it is today. So the only reason I segregated this is so I have the opportunity to vote no on this, as many of my constituents felt should happen a long time ago. So at this time, I would make a motion to deny communication 2022-374. Thank you.
So we have a motion to deny communication number 2022-374. Do we have a second? We do not. Okay, so it dies. Anyone else have any? Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. I don't even need to make a comment after what Commissioner Fisher had to say. I just want to say that I'd like to move to concur with communication 2022-374 and place this on file.
We have a motion and a second to concur with communication number 2022-374 and place on file. Is there anything else on the question? No, fine. Could commissioners please vote? Still didn't go. Oh. And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote. 10 yea, 1 nay, motion passes. Moving on to communication number 21, communication number 2022-377, Eileen Joyce, County Attorney, requesting Council of Commissioners authorization to have Chief Executive Gallagher sign 2 agreements between Vigilante Rodeo and Saddle Club, the City and County of Butte-Silver. Both agreements relate to the production of the 2022 County Fair. Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Just a clarification, this would be for putting the county attorney on the spot here. So the original agreement we had, and Chief, maybe you could help this out too. The original agreement that the Saddle Club and the Fair had, like back in 2018, and if I'm wrong, I'll learn here today, I guess. But in 2018, when the barns, the 2 metal buildings were donated to the Saddle Club to erect, and then the city and county could use them for 30 days. That was the deal that was made. Obviously, 2018 was a long time ago. They're still not put up. But in that contract, the fair had 30 days. Now the new contracts are 7 days, I believe. So I guess where I'm going with this is, when we're a long ways beyond 2018, there's no buildings out there erected that the fair can use for 30 days or any days. The new contract's only for 7. When does this other contract that's signed, does that come null and void ever? I don't see anything that says, unfortunately there wasn't a time frame put in there, but I don't know. I guess help me out here on how do we move forward? It's been 18, and they're going to put them up. We need to just bring in the Pacific Steel and donate the money. I mean, some needs to move forward on that part, but help me out here.
Commissioner O'Neill, I'll defer to the County Attorney Joyce, as I wasn't part of the agreement on this, but County Attorney Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Commissioner O'Neill, there wasn't a contract per se in 2018. What was done was a resolution that Butte-Silver agreed to give the Vigilante Rodeo and Saddle Club those 2 pole barns, and in the bill of sale, it indicated that that sale was conditioned upon Butte-Silver being able to use those pole barns for a period of 30 days each year, and in particular, part of that 30 days was during the time that the county fair was put on. These agreements that are before the council tonight are specific to the use of the Vigilante Rodeo and Saddle Club's grounds to hold the county fair for this year. And that's why it's for 7 days, because it's specifically related to the term of how long the fair activities are going to happen for this year. So they're 2 separate issues. The agreements tonight are just related to authorizing the chief executive to sign contracts that Butte-Silver Bowl through its county fair board will use the fairgrounds to put on the fair. And then, you know, there'd have to be further discussions about them putting up the pole barns. I mean, we did give them to them, they aren't up yet, but when they are up, we get to use them 30 days during the year, but that's specific to the pole barns.
Thank you, County Attorney Joyce. Follow-up, Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you, Kenny. Appreciate the clarification. On that note, just wanted to let you guys know that the fair is coming up. Jody Messina's coming. I talked to her earlier today. She's excited about coming to Butte. I will also, if you guys need tickets, let me know. I'll deliver them to you. With the heavy high gas prices, I'm going to make that sacrifice to deliver you all tickets throughout the county. They're $15. And you just get a date and come, okay? So I appreciate all the clarification on that stuff. And at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we move on. If anybody have any questions on that?
So would you like to make a motion to concur and place on file?
Thank you, Chief. At this time, I'd like to make a motion and concur and place on file communication number 2022-377.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to concur and place on file communication 2022-377. Is there anything else on the question? Commissioner Sorge.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. I guess it's a question for Commissioner O'Neill. Does that mean you're willing to take on the steel buildings and get them up?
Commissioner Sorge, Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you, Chief Executive. It depends on how that what that challenge is. Yeah, I would accept that challenge, but maybe we need other grounds to put them on. Maybe we'll go forward later on.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Neill. Anything else on the question? Seeing none, could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yeas, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Now, do we need to go back to that? Okay. So we'll go back to communication number 2022-378. This communication is from Lisa Bracco, the Chair of Butte-Silver Bowl County Fair, requesting authorization for Chief Executive to sign a revised performance contract with Jody Messina, an artist scheduled to perform at the Butte-Silver Bowl County Fair August 6, 2022. This communication was not submitted in time. Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to concur with communication 2022-378 and place this on file.
We have a motion and a second to concur and place on file. Is there anything on the question? Seeing none, could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yeas, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. All right, moving on to Section 3, Ordinance and Resolutions for second reading. We have 3 of them, okay. First one's Council Bill number 2022, Ordinance number 2022-07. Clerk, please read the caption.
An ordinance amending section 17.060.030 of Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, which section adopted the zoning map of Butte-Silver Bow, State of Montana, providing for a change to the official zoning district map by rezoning approximately 4.8 acres from R4 manufactured home zone to C2 community commercial zone, commonly located at the northeast corner of the intersection between Warren Avenue and Longfellow Street. The subject area comprises 2 properties. One is legally described as Section 31 Township 3 North, Range 7 West, portion of Lot 10 in northeast quarter, and the other is legally described as Section 31 Township 3 North, Range 7 West, Lot 56 in northeast quarter, 1977, Gurdon 28 by 60 of the City and County of Butte-Silver Bow, State of Montana, providing for a repeal of all parts of the ordinances in conflict herewith and providing for an effective date herein.
Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to place Council Bill number 2022-07, Ordinance number 2022-07 on second reading and passed, having been deemed fully read at length.
We have a motion and a second to place on second reading. Anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? Would anyone like to change the vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
1 yea, 1 abstain.
10 yea, 1 abstain. Please note that Commissioner Fortune abstained from the vote due to conflict. Point of order. Okay. Okay, point of order. So, Commissioner, County Attorney Joyce.
Did that already happen? I think the first time that
Yeah, I think
the communication was introduced anyway, before the actual ordinance. I think he already, and the council voted that he did have a conflict.
right. I think you're correct. That's correct. Thank you for clarification. So it was already clarified that he was abstained. Okay. So 10 yea, 1 abstention. Motion passes. Okay. Moving on to Council Bill number 2022-08 and ordinance number 2022-08. Clerk, please read the caption.
An ordinance amending section 17.060.030 of Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, which section adopted the zoning map of Butte-Silver Bow, State of Montana, providing for a change to the official zoning district map by rezoning approximately 198 acres from R1S Single Family Suburban Residential to M1 Light Industrial, commonly located south and east of the existing South Butte Industrial Park, south and east of the intersection between South Parkmount Street and Basin Creek Road. The subject area comprises part or whole of 6 different properties in sections 17 and 18. See attached map, Appendix A, of the City and County of Butte-Silver Bow, State of Montana, providing for the repeal of all parts of ordinances in conflict herewith and providing for an effective date herein.
Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to place Council Bill number 2022-08, ordinance number 2022-08 on second reading and pass, having been deemed fully read at length.
We have a motion and a second to place on second reading. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
7 yes, 3 nay, 1 abstain.
So we have 7 yea, 3 no, and 1 abstain. Motion passes. Moving on to Council Bill number 2022-09 and ordinance number 2022-09. Clerk, please read the caption.
An ordinance amending section 17.060.030 of Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, which section adopted the zoning map of Butte-Silver Bow, State of Montana, providing for a change to the official zoning district map by rezoning approximately 2.3 acres from R1S Single Family Suburban Residential to M2 Heavy Industrial, commonly located at the southwest corner of the intersection of Beef Trail Road and South Montana Street. The subject area comprises the northern portion of the 2 different properties. See attached map, Appendix A. The properties are legally described as Wathena Placer, Section 25, Township 3 North, Range 8 West, M and B portions of Section 25, Township 3 North, Range 8 West, M and B portions of the south half, west portion, MA 1270, ME 1681 of the City and County of Butte-Silver Bow, State of Montana, providing for the repeal of all parts of ordinances in conflict herewith and providing for an effective date herein.
Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to place Council Bill number 2022-09, ordinance number 2022-09 on second reading and passed, having been deemed fully read at length.
We have a motion and a second to place on second reading. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote. 11 yea. 11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving on to Section 4, ordinance and resolutions for emergency suspension of the rules. We have 2, resolution number 2022-43, Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. I move for the suspension of the rules for the purpose of passing council resolutions number 2022-43 and 2022-44 by waiving subsection 7 of Rule 36 of the Rules and Order of Business of the Council of Commissioners, thereby having it considered for advanced passage without reference to the Judiciary Committee.
We have a motion and a second to have an emergency suspension of the rules for resolution number 2022-43 and resolution number 2022-44. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? Anyone would like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yea, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving back to resolution number 2022-43, clerk, please read the caption.
A resolution authorizing and approving the transfer of the real property described as Lot 1A, a tract of land located in the southeast quarter and the southwest quarter of Section 24, Township 3 North, Range 9 West, Principal Meridian, with the city, county of Butte-Silver, Montana, and shown on the amended plat number 1126B-RB to Sam Motor Freight Line, LLC, in accordance with the provisions of the Butte-Silver Municipal Code and providing for an effective date herein.
Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to place Council Resolution 2022-43 on final reading, having been deemed fully read at length.
We have a motion and a second to place on final reading. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yea, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving on to resolution number 2022-44. Clerk, please read the caption.
A resolution granting conditional approval of the Aware Inc. major subdivision of the city and county of Butte-Silver, state of Montana, providing for the repeal of all parts of resolutions in conflict herewith and providing for an effective date herein.
Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. At this time, I move to place Resolution 2022-44 on final reading and passed, having been deemed fully read at length.
We have a motion and a second to pass resolution number 2022-44 on final reading. Is there anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
11 yea, 0 nay.
11 yeas, 0 nay, motion passes. Moving on to, please note the calendar and other meeting events. Now we'll move to any public comment on any matter not on the agenda tonight. Seeing none, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Stay cool over the next week.
Tomorrow night should be a warm one for zoning board. But he's going to have us. Well, Dylan figures it won't take long, because they don't make any kind of report on planning, and just, that's up to the zoning board, I guess. We're curious to see how that all goes around. It will be. Huh?